Hello, folks. Welcome in. Welcome back to the channel tradition of doing a tier list at the start of every format. So this is going to be my prediction tier list. The ban list dropped about 2 hours ago as of recording of this video. Not quite sure when this video is going to go live for everyone, but here we go. I'm only going to talk about certain leaders. All the ones I don't want to really talk about that I don't think is super relevant are down here. But let's get started. We're gonna go in order of when they came out. So not a lot of leaders, but we're gonna try to fire through some of the ones um, that are not as good. Let's say. So first of all, we have Red Zoro. I think this deck has to compete for a spot with Red Rayleigh, and it's a competition that it's gonna lose, right? I think you actually have an okay Green Zoro matchup, but I think because we're gonna be in like a more of a jungle format, this deck is kind of weak to Sakazuki, um, but it still has potential. It did lose like its best matchup with UP Luffy and Bellow. Um, but this deck obviously won a lot of championships in Japan, so it does definitely have the potential to sneak into the top cut for us still. Red Ring Law. I think this leader. I always believed in this leader. I think this leader has a lot of potential. It's an aggro deck that beats other aggro decks. Um, it does take a. It is really hard to play. Um, I think the Rayleigh matchup is actually very skill intensive for Red Green Law. The Green Zoro matchup can be a little rough. But I think you actually still have an okay matchup in the likes of GP Luffy, um, the likes of even like Sakazuki. I don't think this deck completely dies to. Um, but we'll have to see. This deck does take a very good pilot, and it kind of suffers from the same thing that Green Yellow Law is going through this format. But we will see. Now, Blue Duffy. This is a deck that we've not seen in a while, and I truly believe that this leader is going to have a resurgence. A lot of decks that is getting played might does actually lose to this. You know, decks like Red Zoro, decks like Red Rayleigh, even like decks like Bellow is still super favored against. Um, Even like against Sakazuki, this was like the OG counter to Sakazuki back in like OP5. Um, if people are playing, so even like um, it beats even some of the later game decks, even without Jinbei. You know, GP Luffy can sometimes be a bit of an issue. Um, but honestly, if they don't see like multiple electric lunas, it's fine. You have a tilt deal with everything, right? You have really nice blue bodies to remove things on curve. You have amazing events in the sense of like Grab Blade Red Rock. You can even have like the 9 cost Dracul Mihawk, and like if you want to play a later game build, you even have the 10 cost Kaido to draw 4 Kaido. Anyways, moving on. We have Black Smoker. I think this deck does have potential. I don't know too much about this deck, but for me, there's no real reason to play the deck over something like Rob Lucci or Sakazuki. You know, like the 5 cost Tashigi obviously is great, um, but we're not going to be in a format where we need to trash everything. Even though Burgess is still a problem for like Lucci, um, Sakazuki can get around that with like Houndblaze and Amano. And what's it called? The 3 cost Sanji and the new blue purple Sanji leader, you just can't remove anyway. You know, like no matter what black deck you're going to remove. But I do see the potential in this deck. See with Arlong. I'm not an aggro player, but this deck does seem very underexplored to me. It has had a lot of support in the past few sets. Um, can't really say much on it. Double attack buggy is obviously good. You know, Onami, you have a lot of good yellow trigger bodies like Kyukunojo and Basil Hawkins. But this deck is here. We'll see what it does. Katakuri, the ultimate rogue gatekeeper. Um, Katakuri has just always been Katakuri. It gets a Nikuma, which can be nice, you know. But like other yellow decks, just use it better than he does, which is a shame. You know, I quite like this leader. Dropping back to back 10 moms is backbreaking for a lot of rogue, and be going into side events. You might not do that well in the main event because of like a lot of the. Again, I say this again. Um, I think Zoro and Rayleigh will just beat this to a pulp. Queen. I do think this deck has potential, but if you want to play Queen, you do need people to stop playing UP Luffy, because UP Luffy is just a better Queen. You know, um, Queen was UP Luffy before UP Luffy, in my opinion. It's kind of what UP Luffy does, but Queen kind of just does better. Now, because UP Luffy can no longer heal, you do a lot better against it. However, I think the modern UP Luffy builds post Banlist is going to start going a little bit wider than usual, which Queen kind of struggles with. Moving on, Bellow Betty. Bellow Betty lost his best matchup in Snakeman, and it gained two bad matchups in Rayleigh and Green Zoro. And I think Bonnie, Luchi, and Sakazuki also kind of beat this, and I think they might start sneaking into the meta. So Betty's not in the great spot. Obviously, still a super strong deck, so it still could sneak into top cut. Don Quixote, Rosinante. This leader, you're basically picking it just as a big fuck you to Green Zoro players. Why? Because Zoro needs to battle characters, and if you just block with your leader, they can't restand, and you get to protect your board. This did go X2 in Manchester and just bubbled out of top 32. So this deck, the potential is always there, you know. And I want this deck to be good. I really like this leader. I think it's a very unique mechanic where your leader has a keyword blocker, and it's really fun to play this deck. So I do hope someone does cook up a good list for this. We will talk about Sakazuki at the end, towards the end. Now, let's talk about Pluffy. Pluffy still has everything. You no longer need to play the hyper aggro style of like playing lead Calamity Disaster with Bon Clay, and you're just ramping into your curve will be 1, 4, 8, 10, right? You no longer need to just go straight to that curve. You can slow down a little bit, play your typical Luffy Taros, gain some card advantage from like 5 cost Sangoro, control the board a little bit with 7 cost Sanji. Because you no longer need to compete with UP Luffy as the premier ramp deck. I think this deck will be a lot better now, especially like now that Bellow Betty and Zoro are kind of out of the meta. You can do a lot better. I do think this deck is not amazing into Rayleigh and Zoro, which could be a bit of a problem. Enel. I think this deck is great. This is going to be one of the best decks in this upcoming format. Why? Not because it really got anything new, but this deck just completely stomps the likes of Rayleigh and Zoro. No, okay, since I'm talking about them too much, let's put them in the list. Rayleigh and Zoro. Yeah. Now, this might look strange that I put Zoro not in one of the best decks, but I'm a big Zoro hater. I've tried playing this deck. This deck is way too bricky for my liking. Maybe that's a deck list issue. I did just grab it off like a flagship winning list. But I think this deck has weaknesses. Obviously, like you can hard tech for like certain matchups, right? As Green does. But I'm not convinced that Zoro is much better than Bonnie. And I think Bonnie, of course, Zoro does beat Bonnie, but Bonnie just seems like the better leader to me. If you just read the leader effects, both of these leaders are completely nuts. You know, being able to restand on Zoro and like being able to rest anything on Bonnie is completely insane. But back to Enel. Really, it's gonna like playing against Enel is backbreaking. You know, like especially with if it's like stage Enel, like you're just never winning. And Zoro as well. You know, like against stage Enel, full starve Enel, you're just everything's getting removed. You can't really do anything. You need to draw multiple Holy Jones to even have a chance. Yamato. This deck hasn't changed. You know, like I don't think this deck really cares about what format it's in. If we're in like a more 5-life leader format, which I think we're gonna go into, this deck gets a bit worse. But Yamato is Yamato. Yamato players are gonna do what they do. Reiju, same thing with Yamato. Doesn't get anything new. I know people were trying it as a way to out like UP Luffy, but realistically, it just didn't. It just wasn't aggressive enough. Um, maybe someone can find like a control Reiji list, which kind of works, but I doubt it. I doubt it. No, Bonnie. Some of you might know, Bonnie is one of my least favorite leaders in this game. I don't like the way it plays. Just playing against Bonnie, you have to play a different way, which is like you have to learn how to play against Bonnie, right? And I just don't think it's a very skill expressive deck. I don't actually think anyone is having fun playing Bonnie, like playing against Bonnie, playing as Bonnie, watching Bonnie play. Um, just not the biggest fan of this deck. However, I think this deck is very strong. Um, you have a winning matchup against Rayleigh. You have a 50-50 matchup against the likes of GP Luffy. And now, with UP not going to be able to heal, I think you're going to have a winning matchup in the UP as well. Which is crazy to say, but you know, without the blocker and the Linen, that deck just really doesn't do enough to warrant Bonnie to not see play anymore. Bonnie lost his worst matchup, gained two reasonably okay matchups. I think Zoro can be slightly losing sometimes, but Rayleigh is a pretty much a winning matchup. Only if you're playing 8 cost Kid. A lot of lists have cut 8 cost Kid to play 8 cost Mihawk. I think if you're going to play 8 cost Mihawk, this is not the deck to go all in on 8 cost Mihawk. Deck like Smoker. I think Smoker just uses 8 cost Mihawk a lot better than Bonnie does. Like what you're paying, if you have 5 cost Smoker on field, you're paying 1 Dawn for an 8 cost AK blocker. And this deck is kind of insane. However, it does have its own issues, you know, inconsistency. You do play the new Perona Searcher, which can be interesting, you know, but I do think Smoker is a bit more of a high rolly deck. It really does depend how many like Mulguns you see, how many 3 cost Tashigis you see. Very feast or famine kind of strategy. You do have a bit of a resource problem. You don't have a lot of card draw like you do in green. You're not as defensive as Bonnie. You know, you are more of an aggressive deck. Whew. Robert Luchi. I will talk about these two. Let's talk about these two side by side. So what's the main difference between Sakazuki and Rob Luchi? Sakazuki can bottom deck stuff, and Luchi can't, that's the obvious one because it's blue, right? Luchi's 5 life, which means you can afford to play a more controlled style with like some more high end units like Tenzan, Jack, 9 Kaido, which I've not really seen the Sakazuki list as of yet. You know, recording this. I've heard murmurs of we're gonna try Navy-less Saka, maybe not play like brand new Searcher and like one called Sengoku, which a little skeptical. But I do think this deck will be good. Do I think this deck is good enough to win a regional? Nope. I think against like Rayleigh, people say it's like assuming it's gonna be Rayleigh. I don't think so. Zoro is gonna be one of the really bad matchup for you. I think even Bonnie, you're gonna have like a hard time removing his high ends. But I do remain hopeful for this leader. I do think it will do well. But I just don't. If it wins a regional, I wouldn't be surprised. But I wouldn't like put my money on this deck winning a regional. Vegapunk. This deck is still very strong, guys. Especially going into the format where we're playing like where the expected best. My expected best deck is Red Rayleigh. Just from playing it, it is a very skill expressive deck. The reason I have put it here is because in the condition that we're putting like the best Rayleigh player up against like the best player of whatever deck it is, I think the best Rayleigh player will always win out. You know, generally. But Vegapunk has a pretty good Rayleigh matchup, and I think you have an okay Zoro matchup as well with your 4 cost S Hawk that cannot be KO'd by leaders and character with Slash. Also Atlas that cannot be destroyed by battle. On to Marco. I think Marco has had his time to shine in the spotlight. I think it's a little bit past. It's still a decent deck. Don't get me wrong. You know, Drew Marco is still very scary, and you can definitely catch people off guard. But I don't think Marco is the premier red control deck anymore, and I think that title goes back to Shanks. I think Shanks is once again going to be playable. You know, a lack of 6K leaders does help it out a lot. Your worst matchup in Snake Man is gone, and in Top Cut, Rayleigh, your deck is generally just great into Rayleigh. A little bit losing against Green Zoro. I say a little bit. It's quite losing against Green Zoro, which kind of sucks for you. Um, but and GP, where's GP? GP Luffy. Uh, I think this deck does okay into GP. Um, like I'm not talking. We're not going to be playing the stage build. You probably play like a hybrid rush control build, like it did when it first came out with like 8 cost dragons, 8 cost Rayleighs. You also don't need to be playing 9 cost Shanks anymore. Um, the red 9 cost Shanks is a 9 cost. Yeah, that becomes like a 6 cost. Bush leader plus 2K. So you have a lot more spots to play like your 10 drops. You know, either that be Rush Shanks or Pop Shanks. What do I have left? Carrot. I wanted to mention this deck is a counter to Rayleigh. Same thing with Rosinante. You're just bringing this deck to hard counter one deck, but you're gonna struggle with others. This deck does pretty well into GP Luffy. Does okay against Bonnie as well. But for me, no real reason to play the deck. It could do well, but no reason to. Charlotte Pudding, another very much rogue stomper deck, a bad player stomper deck, whatever we want to say it. Actually has a decent Green Zoro matchup in my opinion. However, Red Rayleigh sucks for you. Any kind of like the aggro rush deck just still sucks for this leader. You are a lot more defensive now with the Ecos categories. You can ramp to 10, play a 10 mon. Next turn you can play Ecos category plus 2 cost category that turns into Ecos category, so you can remove something and set up a blocker. Time will tell. I do quite like this leader, but I just don't think it's the time for it. Kogara. Kogara gets. I should probably reorder these. Kogara gets a lot of support this set. A lot of powerful cards. You know, you can now search Nolan, which is very relevant. But I think this deck has the same problem of losing to Zoro. A lot of decks are gatekept by this. I'm not the biggest fan of Zoro, as I've said, you know. But you do have, if you want to play a more later game, you do have 10 cost Enel. You can also play stuff like 5 cost Ace, which is good. 8 cost Kid is good. But against Rayleigh, this deck's gonna struggle. But against everything else, this deck's actually pretty good. I think like your matchup with the new Sakazuki, which I think a lot of people are gonna be on, is not even terrible. Buggy. Buggy. Buggy can sneak in the top 10. Your Rayleigh matchup is not that bad. And your Zoro matchup is crippling. And your Bonnie matchup is also crippling. What you have going for you is that you're great into Enel, you know, almost insta win against Luchi, another almost insta win matchup against Saka, another almost insta win matchup. Same with Doflamingo. But against the other ones, it's just not that great. It's almost always losing. Which, of course, you can dodge all your bad matchups and sneak your way into Top Cut, but it's going to be very hard to win out in Top Cut. Purple Black. This deck is still as strong as it is. I wouldn't be surprised if this deck does stuff. Obviously, people were saying that this beats UP Luffy, which you know I kind of disagreed with back last format. But this deck does have its place. You're quite weak to GP Luffy and Bonnie, which can be scary. You're kind of weak into NL as well. not completely certain on this Zoro and Rayleigh matchup. I assume your Zoro matchup might be a little bit rough, just because the fact that the 5 cost Tashigi versus 6 cost original cost, so your leader effect doesn't really matter. But we will see. I do like this deck. This deck is really a lot of fun to play. Um, I think the way forward for it might just be playing Rush to Nika rather than Beard if you control. Blackbeard. Heard a lot of people say that Blackbeard is auto lose against Rayleigh and um, Zoro, and I don't think that's the case. Against Zoro, you can seeing a lot of lists play the 2 cost nullification event, just to negate Zoro's leader and minus it by 4, which is like helps a lot, right? If you get your leader effect nullified as Zoro, the game basically ends. Against Rayleigh plays a lot of small cost units, so like when a Doc U hits the field, it's like if you can establish 2 Doc U's, the game basically over. It feels really bad to swing into Doc U's, but if you don't swing into Doc U's, you can't really do much, you know. Your characters, unlike Red Zoro, your characters don't really swing the turn they come out. You do play like Kid Killers and Zoros, but just not enough. Even 3 cost Jinbei has an on play to gain rush, so it's probably one of the reasons why I really doesn't want to play it. But overall, I think this deck could be very good. You still have a rough matchup in GP Luffy, but looking at the Doflamingo, but you have like a lot of good matchups in like up here, like Enel, Bonnie, Sakazuki, Shanks, Smoker, and Rob Luchi. All pretty favorable matchups for um, Marshall D. Teach. Green Yellow Law. I think this deck is still good, um, but it will take a very good pilot to top an event with it. Obviously, very losing into Green Zoro, which is turning out to be a bit of a boogeyman for this format. It was winning everything in the East at the start of the format, and now it's kind of died down a little bit. It's going to take a long time for people to get used to, and it's going to keep a lot of rogue decks, which I'm not very not the greatest things in the world. Yellow Kid. Yellow Kid. A lot of hype about this leader. Personally, I don't like Yellow Kid because I think NL just does what Yellow Kid does, but better. But there is a world where, um, if the meta shapes like to like something like this, that Yellow Kid, it seems super playable. Um, Being able to restand everything means, and you nullify Zoro's event. The only line that I can see where I end up playing Yellow Kid rather than Enel is that if I'm going the regional and I'm scared of going to time everyone, because Kid can finish the game pretty easily and Enel cannot, right? The game of Enel is going to go on very long. It's also a lot more punishing to make mistakes on Enel than it is on Kid, because when you rest your board on Kid, you can restand it back up so you don't lose your bodies. Um, but when you rest your board on NL against Green Zoro, it's gone. UP Luffy. I'm gonna put this deck here. I don't think this deck is gonna be very common in Top Cut anymore. Losing both of them is a very big deal. If you're gonna be playing Don Quixote package, is nowhere near as strong as like Katakuri plus Linlin. I know I've just won a regional with this. I'm actually so glad that it's gone. This format was very stale, and this was the only real playable leader for me. But right now, the way it's looking up, I would be playing things like 7 cost Kid in it. I would be playing things like 8 cost Doflamingo, maybe 9 cost Draco Mihawk as well, just for some removal. It might be worth looking into to see if we can play like the 7 cost Luffy Taro package. That's something that could be worth checking out, and something I'd be open to testing as well. I will be trying like UP, maybe like 1 or 2 locals, but honestly, I just don't think this leader has what it takes anymore. Blue Yellow Nami. And put you here. Actually, let's put this here. until the new structure deck comes out, I'm not a believer in this deck. The promo really helps, but I don't think we're going to be getting a promo anytime soon. If you have the new ST and promo, I'd probably put this deck like maybe here. But unfortunately, without the promo, it's very bad going second, because it just feels like you're behind the turn every single time. All right, red, purple, Luffy. Now, this leader can sneak back into the meta. Now, this is the other 6k 3 life leader that also ramps a lot. I think being able being a 6k leader that ramps that can use Big Mom is just insane, right? Also, you're ramping to some of the more powerful 10 cost red characters, which is different from UP. You're more of like an aggressive deck, a lot more of an aggressive playstyle. However, this deck will struggle against silvers and GP. But I wouldn't count this deck out. I wouldn't be surprised if someone finds success with this deck. I do think it's very, very strong. Black Hill Luffy, a deck that I think has always had a lot of potential. I really like this deck, very skill expressive. People were doing well with the last format, which I'm surprised. So I'm very excited to see how this deck will do now that Snake Man is out of the format. Alright, we've got 4 leaders here. Rosinante. I don't want to talk about this leader. This leader sucks. Koala. Look, this deck is good against like some of the more control decks that try to be aggro. But when you play against aggro, it is like the worst. Like, it's the worst feeling in the world. You're just dying so fast. Kuzan. Kuzan is one of the decks that I'm super excited to play. It's a lot of fun. You draw a lot of cards. You find answers really quick. However, the problem with the deck is that you have no inbuilt removal. Your removal is kind of weak unless you want to play the 7 cost Borsalino. You can garp into it, but this deck draws a lot of cards, which is a lot of fun. You can, if you go first against Zoro, it's super winning. Same with Rayleigh. You have the resources to beat both of them. GP Luffy can be a little hard. Bonnie is like okay. Teach is okay. Enel is you have a very favorable matchup in it. Second can be rough if you don't see your what's it called, Garps. But overall, I think Kuzan is the best blue navy leader as of now. Maybe like Saka will just come out and win everything, right? But I think the time for this leader has passed. The last leader we're going to talk about is Sanji. This deck is a lot of fun. It is super, super consistent, right? Having the 4 cost ulti on a 1 cost event and being able to play Sanji's Pilaf for free off leader effect is just absolutely insane. But I don't think a lot of people are going to be on this deck to make it work. Like, you're just super losing in the Rayleigh and super losing in the Zoro, right? Even in the Teach, your cards that can be removed, it just gets negated and then removed. Against, I'm not actually, to be honest, I'm not sure how the GP matchup goes. Bonnie is a bad matchup. Enel is a reasonably okay matchup. I would say quite good for you. Saka is obviously great for you. Any deck that wants to remove stuff and you have body that say cannot be removed, obviously it's going to be good. That is everything. Let me see. Anything I would like to move? Maybe this up a little bit. But yep. I'll maybe move Shanks up a little bit. Just above Kid. Yeah. I mean, yeah, this is what I would rank it in order. I'm very believing in this deck at the moment. So, anyways, thank you guys for watching. This is going to be my tier list for the OP12 meta prediction tier list, I should say. Let me know if there's anything I missed, any leader you think I overrated, underrated. Share your opinions in the comment section, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Goodbye.